gets a goal? Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, so we're back after international break. New house for me, so sorry for any funky sounds or echoes. Like for those who can't see, which is basically all of you, I'm podcasting from under a blanket in my dining room just because it's so echoey. I've got to have this on, but it looks like I'm kind of inside a teepee or a yurt or something. As thoughts turn to the beach, all three of us back together. As we mentioned, Anthony is here. But Nick, first, you all right? Good international break?
Yeah, it's all right, thanks. I've got to say, yeah, you do look absolutely ridiculous. So you'll have to share a photo of yourself because it's just.
I did. I shot it up already.
Oh, really? Yeah, no, it's just hilarious. But yeah, the international break was good, thanks. Just nice Easter break in general as well from work. Nice to see some family. I haven't seen my family in so long, so actually spending some time with them was brilliant. But otherwise, yeah, the Premier League's back, so we're hitting that final stretch of the season, aren't we? So there's lots and lots for us to talk about in this pod. Reminder, of course, we are Who Got the Assist. Make sure to give us a follow on Twitter at WGTA_FPL or at WGTA_Nick for myself, at FPL Stag for Anthony, who's back. And also Instagram, WGTA.FPL. So yeah, Anthony's back after his stint of absence. How are you doing? How are the exams? Are you pleased to be back?
Yeah, great to be back, and all the better to hear both your voices and to see Tom peering from under a rug occasionally coming up on the camera. It's great to be back. Yeah, it was a rough international break supporting the Ireland team losing to Luxembourg and barely scoring and all the rest that goes with supporting Ireland. But in general, things are pretty good, and it's nice to have FPL back as well. This pod, an interesting one because it's one that we're now on our third recording of over the years. So we didn't do it last year with Project Restart, but all of the other seasons we've talked about on the beach. And so it's become an annual pod, which is basically we're looking at the teams who have nothing to play for and who we should be potentially targeting because of their lack of motivation. Also on this pod, the correspondence section, along with me, returns with a message from a well-known fourth amigo. But first up, of course, we're going to have the game week reviews and the market forces.
Right, let's go over with. It's me first. 43. That's right. 43 points, people. Captain Bamford, alongside Anthony, actually. I think when I saw that you captained him, I thought, oh, it's all over now. And so it proved, really. I think it's just one of those times where you have a horrific game week. And this what's happened to me this week, to be honest. I didn't captain Kane and I captained Bamford. So obviously Kane, the 13 points don't really matter because everyone captained him. And outside of that, Bruno assist. Well, who cares about that? Rafinha 6 points. Meh. Diaz got a clean sheet. Martinez. Meh. Konsa and Veltman off the bench. No Lingard. Oh, yeah. One of those weeks where you just want to move on from it very, very quickly. Yeah, absolutely punish it. I've not looked at my rank. Frankly, I'm not going to. That's not me being a coward. It's just me looking out for my own mental sort of bounce back ability from a poor game week. And I think it's one of those things where I just want to move on from it quickly and get it out of my system. Just a shame I've got to record a podcast on the day, actually, because normally I just disappear and not come back until Thursday or Friday. But hey, here we are under a blanket in a new house. Who's next? Is it Anthony?
Yeah, it's me, your partner in crime with Bamford captain. That obviously didn't work, and that's really the 11-point-ish swing that sees me on 53 points instead of 60 something like kind of quite a lot of the people around my rank at the moment. So that means that I've had a small red arrow from 46-ish K, which is a huge jump from when I was last on the pod. There's been a few good weeks in there whilst I wasn't here, and I'm now at about 53K, which is fine. This week, it's a bit like your team, Tom, to be perfectly honest with you, where I had an awful lot of points from players that an awful lot of people have, plus just the odd little bonus from the likes of Diaz and Salah, who's actually hilariously become a bit of a differential for me now. But I'm happy enough with where I am, to be honest. Obviously, the Bamford captaincy is a disappointment, but Spurs' performance was kind of the performance that I expected and was the reason why I didn't captain Harry Kane. Of course, he kind of gets gifted one goal and he shows his class to get another, and that means that you're absolutely buried. Whereas Bamford just had one of those games where he just wasn't on it, and that happens to everyone, and that's unfortunate. But look, we move on. We go again.
I'm on top, so I got 58 points this week. So whilst you've not been on the pod, you've been absolutely bossing it. So I'm no longer top of the three of us.
Might as well tell the listeners, actually, Nick, I won a bunch of mini league manager of the month prizes and everything. And I swear to God, with my exams, I was so stressed to the gills. I think I saw about 60 minutes of Premier League football in the whole of March, and that led me to absolute glory in loads of mini leagues like I've not had since I started the FPL Stag account. So yeah,
that just shows sometimes you can overthink it, I guess. Maybe you should be taking your exams all the time, and you might do better in FPL by the sounds of things. But no,
okay,
positive thing. You did really well there, I guess. But yeah, I mean, let's go back to the game week. 58 points here. It's actually ended up being a tiny green arrow for about 500 places, so not much at all there. It's just I guess it's pretty disappointing, really. Even though I got the high score, I'm still disappointed, just because, like, you know, just a week with really good fixtures for my entire squad, and then there were just so many sort of absences. Rudiger and Gundogan didn't play. I had the likes of Bale, Son, Josh Maja all not starting and making bench cameos for 1-pointers in my team, which is just rubbish. You know, I punted on Alonso, and I guess I should be happy considering he was the only Chelsea defender to actually get a return. But it's sort of a classic Alonso performance, wasn't it? With sort of plenty of attacking threat, but also horrendous defending. So
hit the post twice.
Yeah.
But couldn't defend at all, could he?
So yeah, it remains to be seen whether Ben Chilwell comes back into the team. I've got a suspicion he might, unfortunately. And then the rest of the defenders all sort of blanks. So Dallas against Sheffield United, the Villas boys, Constance Martinez against Fulham, which is frustrating. In midfield, it was just assists for Rafinha and Bruno, but I guess it was just the captain call really that I got right compared to you guys. Kind of it's the main reason I came on top. So just I captain Kane and went for the boring pick, and he was the saving grace. And I also got a goal from Watkins, which is very nice, much to the chagrin of his critics. But yeah, small green arrow here.
Yeah, I heard he was pretty talentless. Anyway, let's move on to the market forces, shall we? And it's been obviously, we've literally just reached full time, I think, in the West Ham game. But I assume a couple of mid-price midfielders, Nick, are dominating the market metrics as it stands.
Yeah, it's actually changed a little bit since I looked at the numbers. So previously Lingard was nowhere to be seen, and now he is the second most transferred in player after that goal and assist tonight. He also assisted the assisters, so could easily have had 2 assists. And he's obviously been in great form for West Ham since he joined the club. Now with 6 goals and 4 assists. So lots of managers bringing him in. 65,000 in total, but there's one player who's well ahead at the moment in terms of the metrics, and that's Diogo Jota. So he's had 290,000 transfers in time of recording. A lot of interest in general about some of the Liverpool players. Mo Salah's also appearing in the top 5 most transferred in players right now, and Trent Alexander-Arnold's the 6th most transferred in player. So we'll talk a little bit about Liverpool, I guess, later on in the pod when we're covering the beach. But yeah, Jota's record is just so impressive, actually. That's now 8 goals in 827 minutes of football this season. So it's which is just over 9 games of football. So, you know, it's nearly a goal a game this season. So yeah, I can see why a lot of people bringing him in for his price as well. Otherwise, in terms of the transfers in, it's Kane and Iheanacho. So there's a little bit of a dearth actually appearing now in the forward options with the likes of Bamford and Watkins being heavily sold. Antonio's injured now. So I guess these are the ones that are catching the manager's eyes in the forward line.
Yeah, interesting to see that Iheanacho's form before the international break. And obviously nobody was bringing him in for the City game. Hasn't been forgotten, leading him to be the most transferred in forward. But really it is a story of the Liverpool players who, of course, have been largely forgotten in FPL terms this season, with them being so poor and Jota being injured for so long. And it's interesting to see that now that the fixtures are turning, and just even one kind of solid performance means that just immediately kind of everyone will swing back to them like elastics.
Yeah, with Nacho as well. With Declan Rice, looks like he could be injured for quite a while, and they've got West Ham up next. So I can probably see why people have decided to bring Nacho in. But yeah, as I said last week on the pod, Nick, it's one of those which looked like it was a reaction to, as Anthony just mentioned, that kind of past form, right? And Man City the game against Man City didn't really infuse me too much, but I see people are doing it at least. I guess with West Ham in mind.
Yeah, he's high on my transfer in targets as well for this week. It's definitely a player that I'm considering. And the Manchester City game always felt like a little bit of a write-off. But in terms of the transfers out, it's always a horrible sight when you see half your team being transferred out. I own 5 of the top 6 transferred out players right now. The only one I don't own is Bamford. So it's just a kind of like Bale who's not playing. So I've got to get rid of this guy. Gundogan didn't play. Bamford blanked. And the Aston Villa guys as well, like of Watkins also being transferred out. Just Leeds and Rafinha as well. So Leeds and Aston Villa both have quite significant fixture shifts as well. And we'll talk about them a little bit as well when we're covering the beach.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, I don't think there's any real surprises with who's being sold there. It's kind of guys that an awful lot of people have that are just suddenly not playing as consistently as we'd expect. Like even you see Cancelo and Stones actually showing up in the most sold defenders as well. They're second and third behind Dallas, which again kind of tallies with that. Just players who aren't playing, just suddenly kind of freaking managers out who just want to have 11 men. Like I think a few of us were down to 10 this week, even though I have a full playing bench and I ended up with 10 players this week. So it kind of just shows that people can't really be fully relying on their 3 City players to play. It leaves you very exposed.
Yeah, we've got questions on that as well later on. All right, let's move on to the main topic this week, which is on the beach. So what is this and why is it important? As you said on the last pod, we're getting down to the business end of the season now, aren't we? And with that comes a real split in how teams perform. So some, with indeed something to play for, have need to compete. They'll push on and indeed perform to whole new levels in the back 8. Think Michael Antonio versus Norwich last season, for example. And a team that really wanted to, stay up. They were motivated to compete. Others, though, head to the psychological waterfront in donning their Speedos and heading for that figurative beach that we speak about. Their job's done for the season. There's nothing left to really play for. They're safe, or in extreme cases, they won the league at a canter, or they're clearly down. A great example of this is West Brom in the days of Tony Pulis. In 2016-17, for example, they beat Arsenal 2-1 in game week 29. That got them to 40 points. From there, they collapsed. They failed to win another game between then and the end of the season, lost 8 out of the last 10 games and failed to score until game week 35. So 6 game weeks after, they last scored. Over the last 10 games, when they were on the beach, the ledger reads as follows. No wins, 2 draws, 8 losses, goals for 3, goals against 13 on the beach indeed. So in the past, as Anthony mentioned earlier, we spoke about this on WGTA. Pod 34 and Pod 64, cornerstones of this. And they're really kind of big marks in our history because one man brings them together. Yes, it's Anthony, FPL Stag, who before being a co-host was for some reason brought back every time to do this, mainly because he could bother to do the research. I mean, mainly because he was an expert on it. And Nick and I have been saying recently that he is, or selling recently, I should probably say, that he is the expert on this. So Anthony, in terms of on the beach, what is it all about? Is motivation the great intangible?
Is motivation the great intangible? Indeed, it probably is. And of course, it's an incredibly hard thing to predict motivation. And often when we're talking about FPL transfers we talk about, individuals who are playing for international places at this time of the season. And of course, we have the Euros coming up. We talk about teams that are chasing Europe. But of course, as well, we've also seen the slow horse race for the top 4 in many of the last few seasons, which means that isn't even necessarily a given. And of course, the relegation battle should throw up some motivation for players, and yet sometimes it doesn't seem to motivate sides. And so that's talking about players or teams that have something to do, actually, to play for. But certainly there's an even greater motivation vacuum that seems to exist right in the middle of the Premier League table. And so on the beach very much is a metaphor turned football cliche that we would end up talking about many, many seasons. We've been talking about for many, many seasons at this point. So we're really talking about those teams right in the middle who aren't at risk of getting relegated, aren't in the running for European places, and of course aren't in the run to be a title contender as well. The likes of Manchester City, they haven't won the title yet, so we won't consider them in the on the beach category until later. This is very much a discussion about those teams in the middle of the table right now. So who is that, you might ask? The teams that are most at risk of being in this on the beach zone starts at Aston Villa in 9th and goes to Wolves, who are in 14th. So why Aston Villa in 9th? Well, they're on 44 points. That is 5 points short of 7th, which is, of course, qualification for the Europa League, but they're miles away from the relegation battle. And then kind of falling down to Wolves in the middle, or at the bottom, you have them on 4th. They're in 14th place. They're on 35 points. That puts them well ahead of 18th placed Fulham, who are the last of kind of the teams in the relegation zone right now. But they're also kind of well clear of the likes of Brighton and Newcastle, who are very much embroiled in that particular battle for relegation. So we have Villa, then we have Arsenal are in this zone, but I don't think we include them because they, in spite of being in this position right now, I think would have greater aspirations and probably shouldn't be in there. Leeds, Crystal Palace, Southampton, and then the aforementioned Wolves would be the teams I think that are at risk of being on the beach.
Didn't you throw in Everton there though after tonight? I mean, against Palace, I mean, obviously there was a comedic sight of 4 of their players fighting over a free kick, for example. But they've been off the race, haven't they? I mean, Nick and I said last week they were one of the teams that we just weren't interested in. So could they be one of those teams that we maybe toss into on the beach? I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of disagree with you there on Everton. I know you wanted to include them in terms of on the beach analysis, but just looking at where they are in the league table, of course, they're 8th, but they do have that important game in hand. Currently, they're only 2 points behind their big rivals, Liverpool, and they've got a game in hand. So if they win that one, they'll go above Liverpool, only puts them 2 places outside of Champions League slots. I think certainly there'll be bragging rights in Merseyside, and they've got a really good manager who will inspire the team as well. So, it wasn't the best performance against Crystal Palace tonight, but I think with some of the leaders they got on the pitch, I'd be surprised to see them on the beach this early and be classified with some of those other teams that we've mentioned. They definitely have something to play for, at least at this moment in time.
Yeah, all right, fair dues. I mean, it's an interesting kind of time, isn't it? Because obviously we're nominating kind of the middle reaches, as it were, for teams being on the beach. You've got the likes of Leeds, 2nd for shots in the box over the last 6, Southampton 4th for XG over the last 6. What does it mean, Anthony, when they are on the beach? Are these teams that managers should just be avoiding altogether because they've kind of reached their WBA sort of threshold? It's all over for them. Like, what are the criteria for you thinking these guys are all over?
So I think what tends to define a team that's on the beach is inconsistency or just being hard to predict. And I guess as FPL managers, we bring players in for, multiple weeks at a time, kind of expecting certain results to occur. And when a team is on the beach, that just doesn't tend to happen. Sometimes they turn it on and they have a few good performances, and then suddenly they just don't seem to be at it and don't seem to care. Or else, a 1-1 draw is absolutely just fine, and they don't push for that winner, so there isn't those extra FPL points to get. It could be the difference between just really kind of fighting for every single ball to ensure that a clean sheet is saved when they're 2-0 up, versus suddenly, just whatever, fine, it's the 91st minute, it doesn't matter, 2-1 doesn't matter to us, we still get our 3 points and we move on with our win bonus. And I think that's the type of like small detail, that fractional fight that's in a side that is missing sometimes when they're on the beach. And obviously the West Brom example that you've cited, and I was going to throw in as well, definitely is like the nth degree example of this. Like you'll struggle to find a better on the beach example than Pulis's West Brom, but we have seen it in other seasons where sides just completely disintegrate once they're in this safety zone. There's just all their games are pointless. They are the types of teams that you could target, especially the likes of Man City, who could rack up a massive score, will really make the most of these kind of small, like 1-2% lapses in concentration. And I think that's really where they kind of come into things. So are there teams that you'd have to avoid? No. Like, I don't think I'd be telling you to have no Rafinha, for example. Like, he's the type of class player who can still pick up points along the way and his stats won't drop off considerably. Whereas, does this mean that you might captain against Leeds more? Yeah, I think it does, because I just don't think there's as much to play for there.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about West Brom as well, just because of the adverse effect, I guess, in terms of when you reach that close end of the season where you're not wanting to target the teams that are in a relegation battle, because suddenly a lot of them seem to show real form just in that final battle and put in some really, impressive performances. So obviously West Brom won this weekend, but I remember Darren Moore's West Brom when they were in a bit of a relegation battle, and it was all a little bit too late, unfortunately, for them that season, but they put in some excellent performances, really surprising performances against the likes of Manchester United just in those final weeks of the season. So very, very contrasting views there.
That's why those sides are very much in that, when they're in the relegation dogfight, we won't include them in the on the beach analysis. Whereas sometimes teams that are in that relegation battle do roll over and can be targeted. And to be honest, I think Sheffield United fall into that particular category, where it seems like after Chris Wilder being sacked, you're just like, there's just no hope there. Whilst West Brom, obviously, after beating Chelsea 5-2, Fulham have kind of shown kind of a general positive attitude in spite of the fact that they haven't really been able to escape the relegation zone all season. And then obviously the teams that are just above them, Newcastle and Brighton XG Albion, are kind of in a very different category altogether, where the relegation threat is still there, but also the chance of salvation is very much there as well.
I think Wolves are a team that Nick and I picked out last week, last pod that is, as being a really decent one to look at, because throughout the kind of the next 5, I think it is, Fulham, Sheffield United, Burnley, West Brom, Brighton until game week 35. So 5 really good fixtures there. But I guess looking at tonight with the unfortunate injury to Johnny, again, he's done his ACL. Oh, I felt really bad for him when I read that. Neves and Bolly as well have a short stints at team, it seems. Like, could this also be a trap as well, that teams look like they've got a decent fixture run coming up, but you kind of think, well, they've got that run, but it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, they don't care.
I watched tonight's game, and you like from the first half, you really could see the difference in motivation between the two teams. Just the way that West Ham just went out on the attack, and they're a team that do have something to play for in terms of Champions League. And Wolves they just were not at the races at all. They weren't defending properly. They weren't concentrating properly, and it really just showed in their performance. And yeah, it is a really challenging one to kind of assess what we do with Wolves, because I think a lot of people who are on their wild cards were looking at those fixtures and thinking, actually, I could double up on this team, maybe even triple up with someone on the bench. But after that performance against West Ham, a lot of people will now be thinking, actually, I don't really want any Wolves players at all. There's no appeal to them, just because, they looked very porous, they looked very weak at the back, and they had limited attacking threats. So maybe someone like Pedro Neto might be a decent shout. He might have individual motivation. He might be trying to compete and get into the Portuguese squad for the Euros. But, in terms of their actual performance, they don't really have much to play for at all. They're kind of just about safe, very, very close to being safe. I wouldn't say they're safe yet, but they're on the periphery. So it's
just judging by where the bottom three are right now, they're pretty much almost 10 points clear of that particular battle. It kind of seems like one win will probably be enough to put them over that line. So I think I was interested to hear you guys almost in like, head versus heart, hand-to-hand combat with form and fixtures last week, talking about Wolves. With maybe fixtures winning out then, but form is starting to win out a little bit more on them now. Like, I think Wolves' performance tonight is very much consistent with what we've seen from them for so much of this season. Like, they're one of 5 teams, for example, to average less than a goal per game over the last 10 game weeks. Their XG is only a little bit better than that as well. They're the 14th for that. And like, there are 4 teams in the relegation dogfight. They're the only ones that are kind of worse than Wolves in terms of their expected goals conceded per game as well in that last 10 games. And only Palace and Sheffield United are worse in terms of shots in the box. So to be honest, in spite of having such good fixtures, I don't think enough can kind of pull Wolves around. And so I think when you look at these on the beach sides, Wolves are definitely a side that you're saying just avoid. There's no light in that particular darkness from an FPL perspective, with so many of their big names injured. Whereas with the likes of Leeds, as I said, like, there is obviously a blinding light in Rafinha that you might be interested in, but otherwise I think these teams that are on the beach are the ones that you target. Like, for example, as well, you could say that Aston Villa have completely fallen off. I think you could even talk about selling Emiliano Martinez at this point if you were on a wild card, and I think that's something, for example, that I'm grappling with, because they've clearly dropped off. They're clearly no longer in the running.
On this in a bit as well.
Yeah, they're clearly no longer in the running for anything. They're not going to get relegated. There's not a hope of that. They were way too good for most of the first half of the season. Yet at the same time, they're just not seeming to get anywhere near the success that they had earlier in the season.
So, I mean, the teams who are kind of at the bottom end then, like the teams who are fighting that relegation spot, I guess West Brom breathed life back into their campaign and with that smashing of Chelsea. So I guess we posit then that West Brom, Fulham, Brighton and Burnley are teams that perhaps would be on our radars. I think, but Fulham especially have halved, for example, the XG that they're conceding per game, and have upped their expected clean sheets per game from 0.2 to 0.5. So, I mean, it's a huge example between game 1 and 15 and 15 till now. So we've got a huge kind of, contrast between how a team's performing when it matters. I mean, are those teams that we kind of posit as being teams worth investing in? Is it fixtures based? Is it just because they're going to be pushing no matter what?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily about investing in those players. I think it's about who you're bringing in and who they're playing to a certain extent, and who you're captaining. So I might be, less inclined, for instance, now to captain a player against Fulham, just knowing how tough a fixture Fulham is and how tough they've been in the last 10 or so game weeks, and how well drilled they are. And I look at a game against the likes of Southampton in contrast and think, actually, that's a very captainable game from one of my players. So I think that's worth highlighting. I mean, with West Brom, I guess, you look at some of their fixtures, they've got the likes of Southampton, likes of Aston Villa, likes of Wolves. They'll be targeting those kinds of games as winnable fixtures as well. So, I don't think necessarily we're looking at those kind of cheaper assets. It's just more about who they're playing and who we're targeting for the close season.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that for Nick, that it is probably more about who we're targeting. But I think there are still, definite options within those bottom sides that, could be that basically, you're talking about your 15th and 14th squad members really in that position, or maybe the likes of your second goalkeeper. Like, I think I have Sam Johnston in my side, and I think I'm going to keep him there because West Brom are actually delivering the odd clean sheet. He gets save points most weeks, and even chipped in with an assist against Chelsea.
Creative genius, Sam
Johnston.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so a fine creative genius as well at that. So I think he's the sort of player you'd be interested in. Fulham, for example, have shown that they're no pushovers in an attacking sense now. Josh Maja hasn't returned as expected after kind of an initial surge, but like we are seeing, for example, that their Joachim Andersen is getting forward and scoring off corners quite a bit. That seems to be a pretty decent avenue, and he could be an interesting player to bring on a wildcard team. Newcastle, everything's just a bit all over the place, and like, to be honest, I don't know if you could really get too confident about them. Whereas Brighton, XGFC, like there is definitely something to get from that Brighton side, be that cheap defenders or be that kind of risky attackers, be it that guy or the likes of Trossard, but you're kind of really into the punt territory. So I think, as Nick said, your primary kind of use for those particular sides who we would say should have motivation would be the fact that you probably shouldn't captain against them.
Yeah, so treating them as a kind of, as you said, it's like kind of, for a while we were all saying, yeah, Fulham are the team to captain against, etc., etc. But that really seems to have broken down in recent times. But I guess that kind of leads us on to the more positive side of things, and the more motivated teams. And Nick and I spoke last week a lot about Leicester, Chelsea, and Liverpool. Has this game week changed our minds? Let's start with Chelsea. So obviously the meltdown has been noted. They conceded, 14 shots, 7 shots on target, 1 big chance, 1.75 XG, but got hit for 5. And that's double their average shots conceded per game over the last 6, and XG conceded over the last 6. Is it just a freak result? And obviously that red card for Thiago Silva, that's really hard to legislate for. Their upcoming is still, more than acceptable, really. Crystal Palace, Brighton, West Ham, Fulham, before it then goes into Man City and Arsenal. With Chelsea, they're still going to be motivated, aren't they, Anthony? It's still going to be a team that we should be looking at and maybe hoping that people are put off by due to them being thumped by the baggies.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, I think, with Chelsea, because as you say, like their next 4 fixtures in particular are really, really stand out. And that defensive collapse was a complete shock. And I think you guys very much pointed out how, with their attack being so rotation prone, really their defense is the thing to invest in. I think anyone who wildcarded and tripled up on Chelsea, you didn't think that was a bad idea ahead of game week 30. And it just obviously was a complete shambles the way it worked out. So there was an interesting article in The Athletic just there in the last day or two, looking at that Chelsea collapse and kind of discussing the debrief that went on at Chelsea's training ground afterwards. And Thomas Tuchel was identifying Kurt Zouma and Jorginho particularly for criticism for their particular defensive antics in that game, which bodes well, I think, for the likes of Rudiger, who obviously didn't play in that game, having played 3 times for Germany in the international break, and also had some sort of bust up, which meant that he didn't play. It seems like that was kind of over-egged and over-reported, and I'm not too concerned about him not playing into the future. Nick's already as well talked about the potential that Ben Chilwell might find his way back into that side after Marcus Alonso showed that he can attack but not defend again. So we have a kind of a useful foil with Chelsea that we can actually look at how they play against Porto in the Champions League and see, like, have they got their heads back in check? If they have, then great. I think just to drive on forward with their defense. Their XGC is still very good overall. It's fair to say, I think, that they're probably the 2nd or 3rd best defense in the league, and there's some really good value in there. So a shock result aside, I'm not too concerned about Chelsea. Mason Mount as well, I think, attack-wise, again, proving that he's probably the guy to have.
Yeah, Mount didn't start, of course, as well. And yeah, I think it is worth highlighting the red card and just how much of an impact that has. Because obviously we saw it at the beginning of the season, Man U against Spurs, when Martial got sent off in the first half, how that impacted Manchester United in that particular game. And of course, that was a freak result. Southampton have had a couple of infamous early red cards as well, which have resulted in some absolute thrashings. There was another one with West Brom against Crystal Palace, which was another thrashing. So it's basically when you get a red card in the first half, it kind of just ruins the game plan, and we've seen some massively freak results off the back of those early red cards. So I think there's nothing really to worry about in terms of Chelsea and what they're targeting. I think obviously going back to sort of teams being on the beach is certainly not on the beach because they're going to be targeting that top four, but you've got to factor in as well what else is going on. So they are in the Champions League. They do have a quarterfinal against Porto. There's a very strong chance, therefore, of them making it all the way to the final and possibly winning the competition. And that will potentially be a bigger driver.
I do still think, though, with Chelsea, that the top four is a non-negotiable objective for them. Like, I don't like, obviously, of course, if you go and win the Champions League, it's fine, but otherwise, it's abject failure for Chelsea if they don't have Champions League football next season.
So
the old, all things considered,
the old manager will be blamed for that, though, of course, as opposed to the new manager. So Tuchel's probably got a.
But one of those other sides that you guys were talking about last week, but who don't have any European commitments, is Leicester. Of course, they lost to City 2-0. They were playing ultra defensively. I think De Bruyne threw some shade at them in one of his post-match interviews, talking about how there was only one team playing. He's got a bit of a propensity for throwing that sort of shade post-game this year, and he did it again with them. But it was still nice to see. Like, Leicester probably had the best chance of the half. Obviously, it was a Vardy goal ruled offside. But I think it shows you that, the game plan that Leicester had was, of course, to try and kind of get that quick goal on the counter off Vardy and then hope for the best from there. And I don't think you can hold that against them. I personally wouldn't be any less enthused about them than I would have been going into game week 31. For example, I think the people who were bringing in Iheanacho, we saw him dominating in the market forces. I think those people were correct to do it. I think compared to the on the beach sides, this Leicester side, they have to get Champions League football this year. They've been in the running for it multiple times in the last few seasons since they won the league and haven't managed to deliver it. And I think it would, whilst Brendan Rodgers has had huge success with them so far in terms of their play style and in terms of some of their big results, if they don't get top four, that's a serious disappointment for them now that they can't win the Europa League to qualify for the Champions League.
You said it's the only win condition left for their season. So yeah, it completely makes sense. And I think the fixtures are good enough for Leicester, that it is worth looking at them. And obviously West Ham, West Brom, Palace, Southampton, Newcastle, those are good fixtures. But you've also got, at the end of the season, you've got Man United, Chelsea and Tottenham. So the last three are pretty difficult. But if it's Vardy, you've always got that kind of, Nick spoke about in the past, that stats-defying element of Vardy, that he loves those big games. And historically, maybe not in recent years, but historically he's performed very, very well in those big games. So, it's kind of a win-win, really. If he has become one of those players who does conform to stats and does do very well in the smaller games, well, he's got the big games too, to do his job. So I guess the fun bit of On the Beach is talking about those individuals who make a difference. So we've spoken about a little bit in terms of Rafinha already. In the past, we've seen the likes of Payet, seen the likes of Bale in 2012, the likes of Josh King as well, carrying their teams for a final stretch. Are there any breakout players we think are worth keeping tabs on? So Rafinha, a player you might want to keep. I know they've got a few very bad on paper fixtures. Leeds' next three is Man City, Liverpool, and Man United in quick succession. But nonetheless, Rafinha, watch him. Wow, what a player. A player you might want to keep. He's second for shots on target, and the top for chances created, a big chance created in the XA numbers. And is it a case that he's a player who's putting himself in the shop window? I wonder. But either way, as we joked with Seb, he's too good for Leeds, so maybe he might be a player who's trying to do that. Sorry, Leeds fans. But there's always this kind of individualism, isn't there, towards the end of the season with players. So are there any of those who are blipping on our radars, guys?
I think the big blip for sure on the radar at the moment is Jesse Lingard. And whilst this is kind of stating the obvious, considering he's returning so regularly, I think it would be mad of me not to mention him in this segment, considering his form. He's pretty much notching up a return every game, if not two, in the last while. He hobbled off in at the end of the West Ham game tonight, hopefully that was just kind of, standard hobble after a tackle and we just didn't have time to see him run it off. But pending any sort of injury there, he's definitely one to be looking at. Iheanacho is another one who's popped up multiple times in this pod already. He was in very, very, very good form going into the international break. Obviously, the City game we're not really holding against him, and so we'll just for now say that he's still in form, and we would say that Leicester certainly have the motivation to push on, and he no more than anyone else wants to. James Maddison as well behind him in that Leicester attack. He had some good chances actually against Man City if you were watching back the game, but just didn't manage to even get them on target, I don't think. So that was unfortunate, but his goal numbers have been quite good this season since he came back from injury, and he's one to look at. Two other players that I've identified in this kind of category, and they're certainly from those top teams, are Riyad Mahrez, who's been amongst the highest scoring FPL players actually in the last 6 game weeks, and Sergio Aguero, who is going into his final few weeks as a Manchester City player, final few weeks probably maybe as a Premier League player, although rumours suggest he might be moving across England somewhere else. Regardless, he is a player that will be of interest to us, but of course will be prone probably to rotation because you'd think he'd be in their starting 11 in Champions League matches.
I feel like Aguero is going to be one of those players that we all have to get in for one final ride. Game 37, game 38.
Yeah.
It's got to be done, hasn't it? I think for individuals, for me, I seem to be talking about West Brom quite a bit. But you mentioned him briefly, Tom, that Matheus Pereira really impressed me actually this particular week, picking up that goal and assist. And he's just dominating for West Brom in terms of sort of talismanic status this season. He scored 45 more points than any other outfield player, and he's now got 7 goals, 6 assists, and he's only 5.3 as well, so a complete bargain. And actually, in terms of the underlying stats as well, over the course of the last 6 matches, he's third for goal attempts amongst all midfielders, and second for shots on target as well, only behind Jesse Lingard. So definitely performing well in the underlying stats. And as I mentioned, West Brom have likes of Southampton, Villa, and Wolves in the next 5, and playing these teams that are on the beach could be a good differential there for your teams.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's always interesting, isn't it? And we've got a few questions, and Anthony, you're on your wildcard. We haven't really spoken about that, but you're on your wildcard. So maybe later on during the question from FPL Claret, we'll talk about players to target during that. But it's always interesting, isn't it, during this sort of period, because it's almost like the form book goes out the window. Because this team's been doing really, really well, but they were doing well when they were motivated. They're doing well, when they definitely have something to play for. And now we end up looking at the fact that, for example, a team like Arsenal, they've got Sheffield United, Fulham, Everton, Newcastle, and West Brom between 31 and 35. But there's the UEL there, and Anthony has given them a honourable discharge from being an on-beach team. But the moment they go out the Europa League, it's all over, isn't it? And you look at those games again, and you think, well, okay, either we played them and hope for the best because hoping to get to the Champions League, or if there's no way of getting there, then they become a team again, which is on the beach. Perhaps they just think, well, it's all over, and it's all about trying to just get to the end of the season. But equally, someone like Nick would say, oh, they're trying to impress Arteta to be in the squad for next year. Motivation, I think, is one of those, to return to a question I asked Anthony earlier on, one of those intangible things, isn't it? Where it's really hard to say, yes, this team's motivated. No, that team isn't motivated. So it's more kind of an inexact art of trying to understand kind of the context surrounding a team going into the end of the season, the business end, and trying to kind of divine, I suppose, whether they are going to be continually a team that's worth kind of investing in, I suppose, Anthony. Are there any other sort of things around the perception you'd kind of advise people are worth looking out for to decide whether a team's incentivized or not?
This is where we get to the point in the season where actually genuinely watching the highlights and watching games will give you a far better indication of where teams are at than maybe those who might be, heavily reliant on the stats at other parts of the season. In that, you can just, it's much easier to kind of see how much players are fighting for chances and fighting for opportunities, or making sure that they get the chance to take a penalty or whatever it might be, if you're actually watching the game, versus if you're just kind of checking up the stats or even watching the highlights afterwards. So I think that's one particular way to do it. But I think overall, it's really just watching performances week to week and trying to figure out, what's the general tone surrounding a team? Is it just job done, head off to Dubai? Or is it very much, we need to go through the motions and get to the end of the season and it doesn't matter? Or is it fight for something, whatever that might be? Like some teams, for example, like they might have FA Cup semi-finals. It wasn't something we threw into our discussion there about motivation, because mostly I don't think it's that important for teams anymore. But that is, of course, Leicester, Southampton, and also you've got Manchester City playing against Chelsea. When we have a smaller team in an FA Cup semi-final, a la Watford a few seasons ago, we think, okay, that might actually affect them. But when it's the big teams, I think it's just another commitment and it doesn't seem to affect them too much. So you could throw that in potentially for Southampton, but I wouldn't get too into it. So I think overall what you're really doing is just trying to, as you say, Tom, kind of cohesively look at sides to figure out like what is their reaction to having absolutely nothing to play for, and then making your picks accordingly.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, we'll go to break here and we'll be back in just a minute.
Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
So we're back and it's time to catch up with the Who Got the Assist mini league. If you want to join the league, the code is cpsulf. And some familiar names at the top, just to round up quickly of the top 5. In 5th, climbing back up, it's David Izzet with Hest Wham Untied, picked up 69 points, decent score. New arrival in 4th, though, is Tim Franson for Sammy. He got 67 points. Captain Kane as well. Ryan Hobbs down to 3rd with Hobbsy's Heroes, 60 points only for him. But up into 2nd, a really good score this week is Nicola. So he got 79 points, which is a really, really good score for him. So well done, mate. Just the main guys in there, like some Lingard, sort of just doing the business there, and like some Mo Salah as well, and of course Captain Kane. Number 1, a little bit of a dip for him, Sean McColl. He only got 45 points this week, but he hangs on to that number 1 spot. Went for a bit of a differential captain there with Son, didn't work out, but still really, really high overall rank, about 180 for him. So still having a great season.
Yeah, fair enough. I saw him. I think Tom Freeman went for that as well, the Son captain, which I respected. I thought that was pretty decent, a good idea. It's a shame that Mourinho didn't start him. I thought he would, to be honest, start him in that game. But sadly for us non-Kane captains, it didn't have an impact on Kane's returns. So there you go. Next is a section that has been brought out of the mud, isn't it? It's the correspondence, the section where we answer written in listener questions at length. And this week it's some randomer called Phil, right, Anthony?
Yeah, it is indeed. It's the 4th amigo on a podcast called The 3 Amigos, a Twitter celebrity, a political commentator, and of course a friend of the pod as well. Hindu Monkey has written in. You'll find him on Twitter at Hindu Monkey. And he writes in to ask, have captains counted less than ever before this season? There's almost no correlation between a good captain score and overall rank this season, with most if not all managers within 50 points of each other. Is this because the top scoring players in FPL points are littered with non-premiums who people just don't captain? Phil also notes that he's a long-term listener and that he's only had mocking shout-outs before, so he would appreciate us actually seriously answering this particular question this time. So thanks, Phil. So yes, that is the question, guys. Have captains counted less than ever this season?
Well, it's not a good week for this, having had a captain fail. I think that in general, perhaps this links in with the growing awareness and consumption of FPL content, which creates a sort of corralling effect. Like maybe over the last kind of few years, we've been doing this. This is our 4th year now. This year seems to be bigger than ever in terms of there being that kind of mass consumption of FPL content. Maybe there's a much larger herd this year than we've seen in the past as FPL has really exploded. People listening to like FPL General at least, or the Scout, or the Hub guys, Fergie and Adam Hopcroft, which has led to there being a sort of large mass of people who are just playing safe in the middle week after week. Maybe the challenge is to kind of think ahead of that sort of herd. FPL's really exploded this year, and maybe that's created the effect that Hindu Monkey observes that there are a kind of a quorum of people who are going to be just doing every week exactly what the likes of FPL General tell them to do. So those people who are able to think outside, spot an opportunity to do something different, those sort of people are going to be rewarded. Just because there are going to be more people than ever still engaged at this point in the season and still presenting you an opportunity to kind of say, okay, every week, this everyone's going to captain, for example, Kane. I thought, well, all right, I'm going to captain Bamford because Sheffield United have been seeing loads of shots centrally. So if this guy really does take off, then my rank's going to be ascending and everybody else is not going to be doing very well if Kane doesn't do very well. Or at least if my captain beats the herd captain, then I'm at an advantage. And it is about kind of just saying, all right, there's an opportunity at any given point to understand what the key captain's going to be, or at least the most captain player is going to be, and thinking, is there a better alternative that I think is a viable option, and should I take that option? I think it is the case that there is a correlation between there being a good captain score and OR. I think that has created, as I mentioned, a quorum of players who are all within sort of a certain kind of homogenous mass. But in of itself, that creates an opportunity. This week hasn't quite worked out, and I'm a bit annoyed about that, obviously. But maybe in future weeks, I'll be doing this towards the end of the season now because my rank's not very good. It doesn't mean that you can bet against the house and hope to kind of long term get maybe 5 out of 8 of the last 8 game weeks right if you do something outside the main captain, perhaps. So it's one of those things that it was always going to be a large existential threat, but could also be something that you can exploit strategically. That's the way I'm looking at it, at least. The template is going to be more solidified going forward. Next season, I think there'll be more people engaged with FPL, more people listening to the likes of the trendsetters in the community, the trendsetters in FPL-dom. It's just a case of kind of identifying the places that the spaces in which you can exploit those words and that advice, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely one of those which is, I'm not too sure whether captains do count less than ever. I think they count more than ever, because if you do get it wrong, if you do go against this sort of large amalgam of people who sit between, I think 500k upwards is probably where the engaged managers are at the moment. So if you do kind of do something to differentiate yourself against that herd, that's where you do very well. And captain's obviously the most potent force for doing something there. I mean, Anthony, that was probably the reason you didn't go with Kane this week as well, right?
To be honest, I think I was really just going where I thought I genuinely just selected the player who I thought would get the most points, and it didn't quite go right. Like it was as simple as that. I just didn't fancy Spurs to do well, and I went against it. I think maybe just to kind of like concisely put what you said is that we have a far smaller gap separating, let's say, 10k to 500k than we've expected, and an awful lot of that is because people are informed and people are picking almost the same players, and the punishing effect of picking a captain wrong means that I think that the captaincy does count as much as ever, or if not more than ever. And I think I would agree with that particular assessment. And I don't think what Hindu Monkey cites as being the fact that some differential players are up there in terms of the top scorers, I don't think is a factor in this, because the fact of the matter is that Bruno and Kane are the only players to have got over 200 points. Son and Salah are to follow shortly. And then there's a big drop off, to be perfectly honest with you, to any of the rest of the top scorers. So if anything, I think there has been very consistent captains to pick who have generally returned, and they have propelled this herd who are quite close together. And I think that means that the captaincy has counted as much as ever, if not more.
Big shout out there to Hindu Monkey for the question. I was thinking about this a little bit, and just in terms of the captaincy, I think there's such an element of luck to it as well. And I kind of preferred the sort of the fancy Bundesliga sort of style of captain picks, which we talked about a little bit before in the pod, where it's a little bit less luck based, where it's it's not 2 times the points, it's 1.5 times, and you can get to pick 3 captains as well: defense, midfield, and attack, which kind of adds a little bit more of an exciting element to it, which is pretty cool. But I think I probably agree with most of the points you both said, so I'm not going to reiterate them. But I'd say maybe if you really want to get to, I think we've said this before, if you really want to push and get into that sort of top 100 in the world, top 1,000, you do have to differentiate from the herd. You do have to differentiate from sort of picking the likes of Kane, the likes of Salah week in, week out, which a lot of us do, just because, as you said, you can see the points gap between those players and then the next bunch of players that are chasing. But then there are those those opportunities that do suddenly emerge throughout the season. For instance, when a player like Gundogan suddenly hits an amazing streak of form, get on that early and give him the armband, and you're laughing. Or if you captain Jesse Lingard, for instance, in the last couple of weeks, again, you'd be laughing. And that's perhaps what differentiates some of those managers who have managed to break into the top 100, because they have separated themselves slightly from the herd, albeit they've taken huge risks, which could have easily blown up in their faces, because you don't have a week in every week where someone like Trossard becomes an amazing captain pick.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the fact of the matter is that to plot your course to an extremely high OR, and I mean like a top 5k, let's say, or you need to have taken risks and taken moves ahead of the herd. Like it's kind of inherent in being at that rank. And so for those people, of course, they probably did take risks ahead. But if we're talking about just general like consolidation of decent, good ranks in, let's say, 100k up to 10k, yeah, just captaincy has been as important as ever and hasn't made any difference. Whereas for those people at the top, of course, captaincy makes a huge difference, because that's how you set yourself apart from that herd. But getting it right is the key question that kind of those people have managed to answer correctly more than most have. Anyway, that rounds off this particular correspondence section. Thanks so much, Hindu Monkey, for sending it in. At Hindu Monkey on Twitter, go over to him and visit his feed over there. And you can be in the correspondence section in the future if you email whogottheassist@gmail.com. You can send in questions like Hindu Monkey did this week, or you might have some sort of addendums to previous pods. You might have your own points to make. You might have some sort of grand theory, or just a poem to write to us about FPL. Any of the above, we're accepting. Get them in. whogottheassist@gmail.com, all one word.
Yep, we may even get a handwritten response from young Anthony. All right, and I think moving on to the questions actually this week, it's more about that particular ethos. So consolidation, you said earlier on about the reason why you may captain a player, Anthony, and this really comes out as well in Alden Morris's question. So he says, and I've got a lot of sympathy for him. That's sarcastic. He says that he feels stuck at his OR, which is 50k. Oh, my heart bleeds for you, bro. But he's wondering if we can help identify between maintaining your rank and being kind of stuck in a rut, at said rank. He's just not too sure whether he's going into every week positively, so he's trying to perform and get above where he is, or whether he's getting into it kind of negatively. Is he going in for downside protection, as it were? I mean, Nick, you always speak about the fact that your kind of main area is kind of 100k-ish, and that seems to be where you are. I mean, what have you kind of thought about maintaining versus kind of trying to bust out of where you are?
Yeah, I feel like I can relate a lot to this question, just because it's the story of my season, or the story of the past 3 to 4 seasons for me. So yeah, I mean, I hit 89k back in game week 11, and I'm just about that same rank right now. So nothing has happened really in 19 game weeks. A tiny bit of yo-yoing, but very limited progress in terms of my actual season. So I do feel like I'm stuck in a rut as well, and I've been stuck in a rut for the past few seasons. I haven't been able to, make that leap up. But so maybe it is about differentials, it's about gambles, it's about taking more risks, less safe options. As we kind of similar to what we just talked about on the other question, really, in the correspondence section. Just not playing safe all the time. Perhaps trying to get ahead of the pack by trying to identify those players that are going to spark. Likes of Lingard, likes of Gundogan. But it is so because of so many content creators, so much content. If something's noticed, it gets very quickly identified by the herd and leaped upon. So trying to find that differential in today's game just makes it so much harder. So that's why I'm super impressed by those managers that do sort of maintain those sort of top 10k finishes season in, season out, like sort of the Mark Subbins and Nate Rice and those kind of guys.
Yeah, Alden's question is quite interesting in that it's almost like a diagnostic question as opposed to an FPL assistance question that we have here from him. And I think if I was to try and help him diagnose whether he's in a rut or whether he's maintaining rank, I think I would have him ask himself, what is the purpose of his transfers? If he is just fighting fires all the time and always then fighting said fire, pouring a very template player on to try and put down that fire, probably tells you that he's just in a rut at that point. That if you have a bit of a midfield crisis now and you bring in Jesse Lingard, okay, yeah, it makes sense, but at the same time, you're not probably doing something that's going to get you too far ahead of people. Likewise, if you bring in Hinacho now, okay, great, there might be a marginal gain, but like if he has one more good week, he's going to be in an awful lot of teams at the top of the table, in the kind of that top 50k zone, and you're probably going to need to do something else. And I think I know now some people have this muted on Twitter at this point, and it's almost a trigger word, but I think that's why having a wild card at this moment is so handy, because I can start to make transfers which are setting myself up to actually attack. I can sort out the fact that I only had 10 players playing this week, repivot my side, to use a startup phrase, to try and kind of set myself up for the good fixtures and the fixture turn and move forward again. And so I guess I'm at pretty much the same rank as Alden, if he's maintained his rank from when he sent that question in, 55-ish K. But that's the second or third highest rank that I've had in the whole entire season. And that's only higher or just around the same as the last 2 weeks, basically. Otherwise, I've been kind of coming up from the millions and hundreds of thousands. So it's kind of been an upward trajectory, but that's been because I've just been, making transfers to look ahead. And I think there was a period where I couldn't escape kind of like 200,000-ish, like plus or minus like 50, 70,000, because for the life of me, I just was always fighting another fire. And once I escaped that particular cycle, then I was able to move forward again.
Yeah, I don't even know what my rank is now. Probably about 400, 500k. I don't know. I was 200k before this, 250k before this. And yeah, I wonder whether it's kind of one of those things where you look at it, obviously like your perception of what a good and bad game week is always comes down to where you are and how you're doing. Like FPL Brain is a good example of this. Brian, as I call him, just because he it was top 10k, and he was saying in the hub chat the other day, oh, I'm in the mud, it's been horrific, I've done really badly, I've lost 4k rank, and I'm kind of looking at him going, bro, I'm 250k, like shut up. But the reality is that to him, that was kind of his truth, that he'd had a bad week. And the fact is that, wherever you are, you always kind of be thinking, well, I'm never going to be satisfied. I think if you are satisfied, you're someone like me who's had a few bad seasons. Like I'd be very satisfied to be 50k as Alden is, and wondering whether I was trying to downside protect myself. I always wonder as well whether it's about being kind of what you're satisfied with, and as Anthony said, kind of what kind of moves you're going to be making to either make your rank better, or if you are buying in the template players, you are just kind of looking at rank and going, yeah, okay, I just need to be where I want to be. And as Nick said, you've got to be making those sort of off the wall choices. You've got to be trying to get ahead of the game to be getting any further than you are. And I'm sure Anthony did that when he kind of moved from 200k to where he is now. I think it's just a case of having a strategy, I think, and following that through and holding to that. I think my big issue has been not holding to that and just kind of reacting to things week to week and kind of sadly buying in last week's template. Anthony, what did you do?
It was all about the chips, wasn't it? I broke away from all of you guys.
Yeah, okay.
When you went off and used the free hit earlier, I kind of muddled my way through, and then I had a decent bench boost. Yeah, sorry, this is all news to listeners. I had a decent bench boost, which I think gave me 16 or 17 points on everyone else that week. My free hit was in the week where kind of a lot of the free hit players delivered. And to be honest, actually, I could have done better on that free hit if I'd kind of had a bit more cop on with what I was doing. But I still kind of gained about 20-ish points on the meta, and kind of between those 2 weeks, I kind of the guts of 35 points gained on the template, and that kind of just surged me up. And then suddenly, though, with the wildcard in hand as well, the whole entire complexion changed. And I think what you talk about, Tom, with my truth being now that at 50k, I'm looking upwards, whereas Alden sounds like he's at 50k and he's just kind of looking from side to side, panicking, afraid that the floor is going to go out from under him. It's a very different position to be in, even though we're at the same rank.
So it's basically the psychological side, isn't it, of understanding where you sit. And maybe for Alden here, it's about kind of, as you said, trying to understand the fact that it could be worse. Things could be a lot worse. And maybe it's the case of appreciating where you are. But that's just a bitter manager.
Tom, being under a blanket makes you much more meditative.
Being under the blanket, I'm very, very warm.
It's just for the listeners, Tom's face is steadily growing redder and redder. He's he has a pink kind of red blanket draped over his head. The light is kind of shining through it, so it has a kind of a reddish look. And Tom's face is quickly catching up with the red hue of the rug.
So warm. It's so warm. Anyway, speaking of No, the opposite. Speaking of getting cold, it's the FPL community on Man City. So at Susin25 writes into ask, what do we do with our City players with rotation in full swing? Mitchell Sterling also asks if it's time to dump them entirely. Is Jota a must own? For example, for Gundog, many people are saying it's time to get rid of him. Move on somewhere else. And Jota has definitely emerged from his injury and very good performances in Portugal and obviously off the bench to score against Arsenal to be one of those players who's top of the market forces. So is it time to get rid of those City players? Stop consolidating with those sort of old school, old template players and move on to the future? Nick, what are you doing with your City boys?
So yeah, I've only got Gundogan left actually. So I already got rid of Stones and Cancelo, which worked out well, to be honest. Obviously they didn't play, would have meant I'd have even less players this particular game week. So I've just got Gundogan left, and I'm not going to get rid of him. He didn't play, but it's worth highlighting. He played. I think he played 270 minutes for Germany over the international break, so he was heavily involved. We saw a lot of teams where their players were heavily involved in the international break, getting a little bit of a rest. Like so Chelsea, which we mentioned earlier, rotated a few of their players, and I think Gundogan wasn't the only one. And Manchester City, who got rotated for that reason as well. So I'm expecting him to be back in that side for the Leeds game. He also scored for Germany. So, he's been scoring lots of goals. He's a different player this season as the player we've seen previous years. He's going to be in my team. I'm actually thinking about giving him the armband. So a little bit of a differential pick. And looking at the rest of my team as well, City have probably the best fixture of all my teams because I've got so many Aston Villa players and Leeds players. I've got lots of fires to sort out in my current squad, and getting rid of Gundogan is the least of my worries right now. So he stays for me. He's even going to get the armband. I can understand why my players will be selling him, especially for the likes of Diogo Jota, who's the form player. He's probably going to come in for me still. But yeah, Manchester City do have that blank in 33 as well. And with the rotation, it kind of makes sense why a few people are kind of getting rid of their City players, especially some of those defenders when, there's so much rotation. Even Ake's back now, so that's another one that might get the call up. And as we said, the title's nearly won, not quite, but nearly won. So there will come a time when Pep starts to play Ferran Torres and people more in the league and then focus his efforts mainly on the Champions League.
Yeah, the 100-point season's already happened, isn't it? It's all over for that. I'm beginning to worry about my City players and that fixture congestion that's been well documented. And Pep himself was just non-committal with anyone, wasn't he? But one thing I am interested in, again, to kind of supplement what Nick said, is utilising that worry for myself. So many people will be, really concerned about the City players in the short term. They've got the midweek Champions League game and then they've got Leeds at home. All right, Leeds are looking a lot better defensively. Perhaps they're not kind of the same proposition as before. But if we apply our on-the-beach theory to Leeds, are they still going to be motivated to do well against that sort of team? Like Aguero has been mooted as being a decent kind of move. I've got Antonio, I've got loads of money in the bank, move him in. I've got Gundogan. I think I'll probably will keep hold of him because 5.5 million, yeah. But I think that kind of it pushes a lot of importance on that Champions League lineup, doesn't it? And the same with Jota for Liverpool. Although kind of his impact as being a catalyst for them performing against Arsenal, it's very, very hard to ignore. Still, that Champions League lineup is going to be something that is going to be watched closely for them. Although I think Jota is probably a why not kind of situation. As Nick said, he's the form player, if we believe in form. And I think he's probably one of those players who is going to be propelled to ridiculous ownership by next week, along with Lingard. But Anthony, what do you think about City? Is it the time to just kind of jump off entirely, or is it a case of using them strategically, as I'm going to be trying to do?
Right. So the first aspect for me is that I, coming into this game week, did have double City defense in the form of Cancelo and Diaz. Already on my wildcard, Cancelo has gone. Diaz currently holds his place. I still feel, even though he's obviously an essential part of that City Champions League side, they're, unquestionably in their first 11. I still feel that he is more likely than not to play, let's say, all but one, maybe two of their Premier League games that are left, bar an injury, of course. And so with that in mind, I think I'm going to hold him in the team. I think he'll survive the cull because at the end of the day, even on their rotated side with, let's say, if it was Mendy, Ake, Diaz, and Walker with Ederson behind them, that's probably still the best defence in the league with the City system. And so with that in mind, I think I'm going to keep him there for those clean sheets. Gundogan is a much more difficult question. And he's still in my side right now because basically I'd lose an awful lot of value if I was to sell him. Now, what's interesting about Gundogan is that he has always been a 90-minute man in Manchester City sides in the last 16 and let's say in the later stages of the Champions League. So once they escape the group, Pep starts him. And it's been in previous years, it's been a thing which has been held against him. And City fans before would have been like, oh my God, why are we playing him? But now, obviously, this season in his current reincarnation, people kind of are very much all for Gundogan again. So, like, for example, last season, he played in all of their games in the knockout stages that they managed to play. So there was the 2 games against Real Madrid, 90 minutes. And, of course, then in the kind of Champions League edition of Project Restart, it was just 1 leg against Lyon, obviously a catastrophic game that they lost. And so they crashed out. So he played that game. The year before that, he played in the 2 legs against Spurs for 90 minutes, obviously, when the classic game where Spurs went through. And you had the 2 games against Schalke as well, which he played both legs of. So what you're seeing is that like he will play the Champions League, and that makes me particularly worried about his being prone to rotation. He started as well the catastrophic loss against Liverpool in the quarterfinals the year before that, so 3 years ago. So you're talking about a guy who is definitely in Pep's Champions League side, has been in previous years when he wasn't as influential as he is now, and will be again. Oh, do I want to sell him though? It's just going to be so hard to get him back in if I sell him. And that's the problem. I haven't made up my mind on it yet. I think 60% says I sell him. But whatever happens in the Champions League this week could obviously have a huge impact on that. Like, at the end of the day, like, he is and has been injury prone in previous seasons. And like, if he was to pick up an injury, the decision would be made for me pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely one of those players that I've said in the past has been one of those who could be an opportunity for people. So there are loads of people who are going to say, you know what, he's difficult to sell. I've owned him for so long. He's sunk costed me into doing very, very well over a last little while. But equally, he could be one of those players who you kind of think, well, everyone's going to own him. And this week, him not showing up, if you sold him for the likes of Jota, sold him for the likes of Lingard, you'd be laughing, wouldn't you? So you could get that payoff, couldn't you, from cashing in on the likes of Gundogan and going elsewhere.
This is it. And like, the thing that made him such an influential player in FPL was the injury to De Bruyne, unquestionably. And obviously, De Bruyne is back fit again. And like, I'm not saying that Pep is going to rest Gundogan and play De Bruyne in some sort of daft theory to keep Gundogan fit, and like you can just expect De Bruyne to keep playing. It's nothing like that. But I am saying that when De Bruyne is on the pitch, and I think you'll probably see him play 50 minutes frequently enough, and probably maybe every game for the rest of the season, Gundogan isn't going to be as much of a factor. He might not even be on his penalties anymore with Aguero back and with De Bruyne back as well. So it's like a lot of the kind of the allure of Gundogan is gone.
Yeah, a lot of that also depends on the Champions League. But obviously, with him not playing this game week, it's basically going to mean he's in playing the Champions League at least. Pep loves a bit of rhythm, as Chris Tan loves to say. So I mean, see what happens there going forward. But Anthony, you've mentioned a couple of times you're on your wild card, and maybe because of the on the beach extravaganza, we haven't quite looked at that too much. But Jimmy, FPL Claret, congrats on the new arrival, or the incoming arrival, we should say. Asks, about wildcard punts and any sort of players who are low owned that you're looking to buy. For example, he's looking at Lacazette. What sort of players are in that sort of wild card? And I think we should probably affix to this the goalkeeper question too. What maybe we should answer this in 2 parts. But at Permacap asks, if you're on wild card, what goalkeeper or goalkeeper rotation choice would you be making? So the ubiquitous Martinez goalkeeper pick looks to be a bit shaky now. So Anthony, that wild card, how is it looking? Are there any punts there? And I guess we'll talk about the goalkeepers in just a little bit.
Yeah, so where I'm currently at, the goalkeeper question, I think, first of all, I'm looking to have Edouard Mendy in my side. I think I want to make him my first choice goalkeeper for these final weeks of the season. That means he would be taking Martinez's slot. Basically, I'm just in the on the beach stakes. I feel like Chelsea are certainly not in that category, and I think that they have to get top 4, as I said earlier. and he's a pretty good route into that particular aspect. I don't want to waste one of my City slots, whilst having Ederson in there is kind of like, it's appealing in some ways, just like, okay, get the City clean sheets and move on. I still don't want to have myself locked into using up one of my City spots for the rest of the year, because I'd like to be able to get, let's say, Aguero in, and I don't want having a City goalkeeper stopping me doing that. Right now, the goalkeeper alongside him is Sam Johnston. Basically, I have him in my team already, and I like what's going on. I feel like I have more work to do to figure out my second goalkeeper, though. I wouldn't be very much tied to the Johnston thing. What I am tied is to that sort of value, though. I don't want to be bringing in an expensive goalkeeper, and I would be considering the on the beachness of teams. Like, I won't be picking any of those middle on the beach goalkeepers like a McCarthy or whatever, because it's just not of interest to me. But as well, like, the fact that so many of the like half decent keepers are so expensive means that I might even end up playing with one goalkeeper through to the end and just get one of the kind of dud 4.0 type. Alongside
Forster, Anthony. That guy can't stop starting at the moment.
True. Could have him, but like, I don't know. He plays for Southampton. He
started 4 of the last 5.
Yeah, but like the steer there, for example, at 3.9. You know, like that does an awful lot.
Massive, isn't it?
Well,
penny pushing there. I think.
That does an awful lot for me. Well, it's also, it makes the decision for me. It's just like, that is that decision done, and we'd move on. Whereas, like, Forster might have some, 1 or 2 good fixtures in there that I'll be like, oh, maybe I'll play him, and then I'll just end up inevitably kicking myself in the gonads, and it wouldn't be worth it. So
yeah, I know.
Look, we'll see. Basically, the goalkeepers are something we usually brush past as the boring part, and I've certainly brushed past it in my considerations of the wildcard so far. Across the back line, so I've said that Diaz is staying. I've currently kept Stuart Dallas, mostly because I like the idea of keeping him for 38 game weeks after sticking by him in preseason. I'd like to have one player who played in my team every single week of the season, and that would be Dallas. So he's still there at the moment, but that's kind of just a nonsense idea, really. The other 3 then, I have Rudiger. I'm going to keep him. I'm not too concerned that he didn't play in the last week. I'm bringing Shaw in as it stands right now. He's kind of taking the Cancelo spot. And right now, Trent Alexander-Arnold is in my side. Robbo will be of interest as well, but just I went for TA basically on kind of the bias of one decent game, really. But we'll see if he's the one that stays. Otherwise, though, I want one of those Liverpool fullbacks. I feel a little bit more positive about them. I feel like they have a bit of a push in them, and they have obviously the fixtures as well, as you guys went into detail on last week. Midfield, Salah stays. Fernandez currently stays. Gundogan is in there right now, but he's very much at risk of losing a place to like Jesse Lingard. I can't believe like the words that are coming out of my mouth. Jota is in there, and Rafinha keeps his place in spite of the fact that Leeds could be an on the beach risk. I have Iheanacho, Kane, and then there's that third striker slot, which is very much up for grabs. It was Antonio. He obviously went off injured tonight. Overall, he hasn't really been delivering as much as I'd have hoped in the last few weeks. And so I kind of feel like he's at risk. But like, really, there is a paucity of options in the strikers. After there have been points this season where it was hard to pick. You were thinking, my goodness, there's 3 good mid-price strikers, and now there's none. So there's a bit of a challenge there beyond Iheanacho to pick that third striker.
Why not Helvidra there? I mean, he's started all of the last 6. He's got Newcastle next at home.
But if you're going to pick one of them, you'd pick
4.8 million and go 352.
But you'd pick Chris Wood, like, if you really wanted to, like, he's 3 goals and assist in the last 3 games. Like, he's kind of consistently there.
But, I mean, it gives you the flexibility, doesn't it? If you've got, for example, if you go for Rafinha as your 5th midfielder, and you say, okay, Man City, you're up next, so maybe I'm going to bench him and hope that Diaz, who you're keeping, is going to do the job for me in terms of keeping clean sheet against Man City, then you play Vidra against one of the most targetable defenses there is. Answering, Jimmy's question, obviously FL Claret's a big Burnley fan. I mean, maybe that could be the way you go that way. Obviously, it's one of those, but
like Vidra, like. Yeah, I might as well just put a dud option in there. I know now he's obviously playing at the moment, but like I don't want to be placing much faith in him. At that point, like I might as well just put a blank player in there.
But you won't be there, right? You won't be like over the course of like the end of the season. You play him in one game and hope then after that he's bench fodder. It's the same as having Emile Smith Rowe. or something like that, like 4.8, or maybe Brewster. That's what we were hoping for, and Vidra kind of could fit that role for you as being like a player to play 1 week, and you can throw in somebody who you're not satisfied with this week, but can do the job going forward in midfield, or maybe you can go 4-4-2 in defence. Lots of options out there.
Maybe Callum Robinson can fit the bill for you as well.
Yeah, he's Irish.
Waving the Irish flag earlier.
You used to be patriotic there, Anthony. It's harsh on Robertson, harsh on Crobbers.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm certainly not putting him into my side anyway. Much as I cheer him on when he's playing for Ireland, I won't bring him into my FPL side.
No faith at all there. Yeah, I was thinking about the Martinez question actually. I don't know. The thing is, I don't really know about selling him. I'd be tempted to keep him because it's just a case of something. Why fix something that isn't broken? And I was just looking at over the course of this season, he's actually on course to break 200 points if he keeps up this average per game, which would be the first time a goalkeeper's ever done that in FPL. So that would be something of an achievement, and certainly with his effective ownership, it would be punishing. But maybe you do want to go for that differential if you're chasing the overall rank, and Villa's fixtures are particularly tough, so I can understand that. The other position, I guess, in terms of the forwards, maybe like someone like Danny Ings might even be a shout. We're talking about people on the beach, teams on the beach, but he's just come back from injury. He'll be wanting to try and get into that Gareth Southgate squad for the Euros, so he'll be definitely fired up for that. And they do have one blank, Southampton, and some tough fixtures, but great opening fixture against West Brom might be a decent shout there for Ings.
He did look like a player who was personally motivated in the Southampton match as well. Like he was, really kind of making his presence felt, and obviously had the returns to show for it as well. He was actually a player that we probably should have mentioned in that individuals on the beach-ish zone, because he is, he's just that little bit too expensive, Nick, is the honest answer. Is that it'd be a lovely punt at 6 million, but the fact that he's up there at 8-ish means that he's just much harder to fit in. Like I really need to want to get him into my side to bet him in there.
So getting into shop window as well. I think there are lots of links between him and Man City with Aguero, obviously on his bike at the end of the season. Anthony, you look really shocked at that. But yeah, that's been all over Twitter. It's been all over Twitter, so it must be true.
Haaland or Ings, really?
Right, as like an additional backup.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, interesting, right? The only one I want to mention there is I'm looking at getting Lloris in to actually rotate-ish with Emmy because Lloris has double game week in 32. So that kind of gives me from game week 32 a double game week, and then Lloris and then Emmy at home to Sheffield United, then Emmy at home to West Brom, 34, Sheffield United at home for Lloris, and then Leeds away for Lloris as well. And it's not the best. It's not the best rotation, is it? At the end of the day, it could be one of those that works for somebody who doesn't have a wild card, isn't able to kind of finesse that sort of double. Finesse the fixtures as they like. Emmy has double as well, though, too, coming up, don't forget. And as Nick said, he does retain the ability to be able to get you points out of nowhere. So this game, for example, 6 saves. No, okay, we're all hoping for a clean sheet against Fulham. Let's not make any bones about it. That's something.
It's like six saves. I think indicates to you what's starting to go wrong at Aston Villa as much as anything else. When that's 6 saves against Fulham, like 6 saves used to be a thing you might hope for against City from him, but now we're in a totally different zone.
Yeah, exactly. That depends performance, as I said a couple of weeks ago. It's just fallen off a cliff, hasn't it? Really, but yeah. It's crazy. It's a great time to be a concert and Emmy Martinez owner, that's for sure. But yeah, any punts in that wildcard, Anthony? To answer FPL Claret's point, are there any things you're doing there to try to steal a march from things, or are you wildcarding some sort of perceived template to push yourself forward?
I think moving away from Emmy is definitely a punt. I think that's actually. Because he's just so locked into sides, and there aren't actually that many people wildcarding that's the sort of transfer that most people won't make, and it's kind of a calculated one. But I think that's a genuinely big risk when you consider his average points over the course of the season. There's very few who were on track for that 200-point season. So to transfer one of those out in a position that I wouldn't necessarily ever make a transfer again is actually a huge call. Trent, I think I would call a gamble at this point, because Trent Alexander-Arnold against Arsenal was obviously fantastic. Obviously he got even an attacking return, and he looked good in general. But like, what's interesting about that game is that, like, was this a return to form for him? After being spurned by Southgate, was he driven on to a massive performance, or was this really tactically naive from Arsenal, in that he was just left as the free man? He held his runs, he ran from deep, and he was more often than not in space. There was a Salah miss and a Wijnaldum miss where he was in really good positions to be passed on to take a shot. He obviously had the cross for the Jota goal, but he had quite a few other crosses and passes that ended up being a chance to create. I think there might have been 4 in total in that game. But he was very much the free man, which didn't work out at all tactically. And that wasn't necessarily why he did well last season. But he certainly made hay while the sun was shining. But that said, I think that Liverpool defence is starting to steady up, and I think he is a differential worth having. Shaw isn't a differential, I couldn't say that, but having double Chelsea defence in the kind of the composite differential form is probably a differential. There isn't really anything too mental about my attacking players. There really isn't in terms of differentials, and maybe that's says something about where I need to really think about this side, and that okay, you could start talking about composite differentials and try to just like hide my blushes a little here, but the truth of the matter is that is having Jota and Salah pretty brave? Yeah, maybe like it's a big investment in Liverpool if I do, for a team that hasn't really been on song all season, like a team that's 3 points ahead of Everton. It's really, they haven't been good, but still I think they're worth having. So it's a tough one to say. It's not good, I don't think, when I'm saying my biggest differential move is to sell a goalkeeper to bring another goalkeeper in, but that's actually where we're at. Yeah.
All right, fair enough. It's quite a consolidating wildcard in some ways.
But I feel like I'm consolidating to like sensible transfers that the template just isn't in a position to make. The template is going to take 3 more game weeks to get to those transfers, and I'm just getting them all in one go.
It's like the scarcity of the wild card being available effectively is your differential, because people are going to have to take -8, -12 from the existing templates to get where you're going to be, which I quite like. I think that's a nice wild card as it stands. Just to kind of bridge into the transfers and captains towards the end, obviously we know you're wild carding. Mick, what are your planned moves going forward?
Yeah, I'm actually considering a hit this week.
Oh, you're your -8 week, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think I'm not really going to do the -8.
I knew you wouldn't. I knew you would. You said it last pod.
I was thinking about it.
I was just thinking he's never going to do it.
Well, at the time, Spurs' double game week hadn't been announced, and I was thinking about potentially selling Son, and that's not going to happen now. So it's probably going to be a -4. I do have to get rid of Gareth Bale. He's got me 1 point since I got him in. So it was a dreadful idea to get him in over the likes of Lingard. That really worked out well. So he's out, certainly, and it's probably going to be Diogo Jota that comes in for him. That seems like a eminently sensible move to make. In terms of the forward line, I also want to get rid of Josh Maja because he's not starting, and I've got plenty of cash in the bank to play with. So potentially looking to get rid of Maja and maybe bring in Iheanacho, but I could even go for Vardy, to be honest. Just go for broke and get someone like Vardy in, try and beat the template. He's probably a bit more nailed on than Iheanacho as well, with likes of Barnes and people coming back from injury. So I'm considering that as my second move on the -4. And in terms of the armband as well, as I said, Ilkay is my team looks crap this week. There's no one with decent fixtures, so I might go for someone like Ilkay Gundogan, a bit of a differential captain there, a decent fixture against Leeds, and you should start having missed the last game.
Right, fair enough. That makes a lot of sense. So I think I'm going to end up buying Jota, I suppose. I've got 7.7 million in the bank, so I'm probably going to buy Jota, maybe Smith Rowe. I've got Bamford, Antonio, and Kane. Let's see what the deal is with Antonio. If he isn't fit, then I won't. Then I'll sell him. If Bamford is, if not, I'll sell Bamford. I'm probably going to. All eyes are going to be basically on the midweek games. I've got no idea basically who I'm going to be bringing in for City. I don't know. I'm doing so meh that someone like a low-owned Aguero in and captain might make sense for me. or at least Jota captain may make sense for me. I just don't know at this point. I think last time I was a lot more set on things, but this time I'm much less set on things. And looking at the bus team as well, God, it's a really, really disgusting week, isn't it? I mean, Martinez are away against Liverpool. The two Chelsea boys, okay, they're away against Crystal Palace. Doubt either of them will start. Son and Kane against Man United. Fernandes away against Tottenham. Leicester at home for West Ham. Oh, it's one of those very, very ugly weeks. I'm not really too sure what I'm going to do yet. But I probably will take -4 to do so. And I'll probably be captaining a Man City player. Or maybe if I buy Jota in, I'll get him and throw the arm on him as well. Basically, either way, I'll be transferring in my captain. What are you, Anthony?
My bus captain, as it stands with the wildcard transfers made, and if all goes according to plan, pending Champions League things occurring, is Diogo Jota. Yeah, even though I have Salah in my side and I also have Trent, I'm going to probably go with Jota. He's just got the form. He's kind of got that Midas touch at the moment. And he's obviously classed as a midfielder, which is rather helpful when it comes to notching up the FPL points. So he's the one that I think I'm going to go for. I'd love to put one of the City players on it against Leeds. Just don't trust any of them to play. Even going to one, I'd be nervous for you, Nick. And I'd love to, Captain Fernandes against Tottenham. I actually fancy United to do one on them after the humiliation earlier in the season. But I just think that Jota I'm again captaining the player that I think is going to score the most points, not breaking away from the template. And I think that Jota is that player. So I'm going to go with him.
Brilliant. So, yeah, we were Who Got the Assist. Thank you so much for listening, and make sure to hit the subscribe button as well if you haven't already.
Yeah, absolutely great to be back to talk to Nick and Tom under a blanket this week. We'll be back next weekend to look over the wreckage of another game week. But in the meantime, make sure to get your correspondence into whogottheassist@gmail.com. We are finally back and running with the correspondence section, and the train will not be stopped.
Yeah, thanks for listening. I am so warm. I'm very much looking forward to getting out of this blanket. It's ridiculous. If you want to look at photos of me under a blanket, you can find them on Twitter. But either way, we hope just you think about beachiness and think about Anthony's wildcard, which has emerged as a secondary theme during this podcast. But in any case, have a very good week, and we'll speak to you next week, which is my birthday. So again, I may be very drunk for that, which I can only apologize for in advance. Goodbye. Oh,
all right.
He emerges. Cheers, lads. Bye.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?